I got really sick and I left college. So the incentives to be on the left disappeared because I was no longer in college and I was just on my own. And so I kind of reverted to my traditional right wing tendencies. So from about age of 12 or 13, when I was first able to form a political worldview, the world of hierarchy made more sense to me than the world of enforced equality. So almost all my natural tendencies are on the right, but I do have like a performance aspect to my personality where I like to try things out. And so for a couple of years, it was really fun to tell people that I was an atheistic communist. And I just kind of enjoyed the intellectual challenge of trying to articulate the dominant worldview in ways that seemed funny and ultra. But when I was on my own and just me and the ceiling, then all my also I think when you're sick, you become much more vulnerable, and so you become much more afraid of change, and traditional ways hold more appeal to you.
Sir, by the way, I've seen. Obviously, you've recovered from your sickness. I hope that it was nothing which kept you down for too long.
Oh, it was awful. It kept me down. Frankly, it kept me down for 6 years. I was basically bedridden in my 20s, and I was
Jeez.
never the same after that. I managed to make about two-thirds of a recovery, but I've had really lousy health all my adult life. And the number one thing that people would tell me is you need to eat meat because I've been a lifelong vegetarian because that's the way I was raised. I've never eaten meat or fish deliberately.
Yeah.
Like occasionally someone stuck it into my food and I didn't notice it. But when I did notice it, I'd have this violent reaction. Then a couple of months ago, I thought, let me just try these beef organ capsules. So I can't convince myself to eat meat, but I just tried these capsules and I started off with just one and then started taking two a day. And then after a couple of weeks, started taking three a day. And then when I was riding my stationary bike, I remember I'd passed about 10 and a half miles on my stationary bike. And I thought, I feel great. But what the heck is going on? And then I thought, there's only one change in my life over the past month, and that is I'm now taking beef organ capsules. So I feel better than I felt in 4 decades. And the only variable that's changed is ancestral supplements, beef organ capsules. I take 6 every morning. I feel great. I mean, I can't believe it. I can't get over my early programming in my taste. I could not deliberately reach out and eat some salmon or any meat, but I can swallow capsules. I don't have any reflux. I never taste it. I'm just able to swallow it. I don't know what it is because I know that vitamin B12 is really hard to assimilate just from tablets or shots, etc. So maybe it's the vitamin B12. I don't know what it is, but beef organ capsules have changed my life for the good. And it's funny when you have something that completely transforms your life for the good. You have two options. You can look back and go, "My God, I had 55 wasted years of my life," or you can think, "Oh my God, now I've got life restored to me." So I'm preferring to focus on the latter rather than the former.
Gotcha. Well, it's good to hear that things are going well for you. Of course, I've never been one for vegetarianism, so I can't really relate to that. But it is good to hear that the beef capsules are performing well in your day to day life. And talking, I suppose, getting back to Stern before we do move on. Now, if one, I suppose, were to look at his audience, which has obviously declined tremendously, declined when he went to satellite radio in the first place, and then it's declined. Now it's, from what I understand, it's really declining because he's basically phoning in his performance on his show. He is doing it via video conference, where obviously in the past everyone would get together in the studio, and that made for a sort of environment which is very engaging. But as a matter of fact, on a recent episode of Stern's show, there was Steve Martin and Martin Short sitting together, and Stern talking to them on a TV monitor. I mean, it just really looked crappy, and not because of anything that Martin or Short did. It was just because it's screwed over. Stern's absence from their physical presence screwed over the context of the environment, I should say, of the interview. And I think this really says to me, perhaps, that Stern has reached the point, even though he certainly was not at this point. I know from judging what I even saw of what he said in the 2010s, particularly the early 2010s. But now it would seem that he's reached the point that maybe he just doesn't care anymore about the quality of his show or about how many listeners it gets. This is certainly departure from where he used to be, because I mean, we have his own words on that video from 2013, which indicate that he absolutely cared about it then. But now, even the stuff that he's discussing is very tedious. His longtime fans, generally speaking, are not happy with it. It's sort of becoming, in many respects, a show more like a personal diary. And all this stuff combined is certainly resulting in increasing listener dissatisfaction with his program. So it could just be that over the last few years, at some point after 2013, he arrived at the conclusion that he did not care about how many listeners the show gets. And with COVID now, with him, phoning it in, he might not even care about the aesthetics of his program. It would just seem that he really is just, as the old saying goes, phoning it in. Anything to say about that, Luke?
Well, he's making over $1 million per show. It's absolutely incredible. He's making $120 per year. He's only doing 112 shows per year, maybe up to 3 hours a day. So 112 shows per year, 253 days off, a salary of over $1 million per year. I like what the New York Post wrote April 27th of this year, that Stern's show is now defined by pessimism, anger, and a worldview that shrinks ever inward, limited in size and scope to the basement, the literal and metaphorical dwelling place of this once great show.
What would you suppose might be the impetus for this? Because it seems like he's sort of lighting his show on fire. By the way, I think you said $120 per show. I know that's not what you meant, but anyway,
120 million per year.
Yeah, that would be
per show.
That's exactly what I thought that you meant. Yeah, he signed a deal with satellite radio, a $500 million deal. So I presume that means he's contracted for a few more years. But anyway, so why do you think then that by all appearances he doesn't care anymore? You think it's just that he has the money and he figures, screw it, I just want to focus on my own comfort? Or do you think it might be something else? I think, the perspective I just laid out seems to be the most likely one, but perhaps it's too simplistic.
Well, it's really hard to do a high quality show, and sometimes you just don't have it anymore. And it's also hard to turn down $1 million a year. So I don't think he's deliberately, $1 million a show. So I don't think he's deliberately phoning it in. It's just that sometimes you just don't have the fastball anymore. Sometimes you just don't have it anymore. You can't phone in a quality radio show. You can't just phone in a quality live stream. It takes a fire in your belly. And it's really hard to have a fire in your belly when you're worth hundreds of millions of dollars, when you've got a guaranteed contract. I mean, look at Ezekiel Elliott. I'm a Dallas Cowboys fan, and Zeke was a dominant running back when he entered the league. But then once he signed his big deal, I think 2019, he was fat and he was lazy and he'd completely lost his burst, and he was just phoning it in. Now, it's impossible to just phone it in as a running back and still succeed. So he was just a waste for the Dallas Cowboys, because once he had his guaranteed contract, like many players, they lose their motivation.